Okay, we are in a discussion of AWS solutions architect, and we've been discussing about few different topics related to development. How do you do coding services provided by AWS? Previous videos, I discussed how traditional development procedures being changed to modern repository-based coding, and then we discuss services provided by AWS for code invest, code deploy, code commit, code build, and then code pipeline. So today we're going to discuss a different topic, which is Amazon Cognito. That is simplifying user identity and access management. This is basically not directly related to development, but it is more likely to Cognito service being used for mobile apps, web apps, for the developer to give authentication to these apps users, and users to give access directly to the services provided by AWS. So that is the link between the apps and AWS services. All right, let's get this started and let's going to find out what this Cognito means, right? Okay, first things to first, what we're going to discuss, just like overview in here. So we're going to identify what is a Cognito. Cognito is IAM service for authentication, authorization, and user management. So AWS has IAM, identity and access management. Then why do you need Cognito? We're going to discuss why do you need that, and then what are the core components. Basically, Cognito consists of two main components. That is user pools, right? And then identity pools, right? And then we're going to we're going to find out what are the authentication methods. So how do you identify uh, users and identity pools? What are the methods we're going to use for authentication? Standard sign-ins, social media credentials integration, and then multi-factor authentication, and then we looking into enterprise level SAML, right, and open authentication. So then, what are the key benefits, right, with this service, right? And then, as we discuss always, we're going to talk about how does Cognito integrate with the other services in AWS, like Lambda S3 API gateway, and then finally, if anyone looking into real world user cases, we're going to look into some real world scenarios where Cognito is being used, right? Let's go into next slide. Just going to go next one. This one. All right. So Amazon Cognito evaluation timeline. So this is a new one with our previous videos. I've been using a timeline to get an idea when these services were found, and what are the development timeline of these services. So initially, it's 2014, uh, Cognito was released for general availability, right? And they launched with the identity pools, right? And then July 2016, user pools identified with the sign up and sign in, and then federation support, open authentication, and SAML federation support was added in 2017, and then July 2018, like identity protection. So it's come up with the advanced security threat protection integrated, and then 2019 signed in with Apple and multi-factor authentication. They normally modern authentication support, and then 2021 a new console, and then token revocation, and then verified permission and fine-grained authentication brought in 2022, and then 2024 managed login, and then pass keys and one-time password. So modern authentication basically. So if I explain, this one is the 2014 foundation, and then 2016 user management, and then 2017 it was enterprise ready federation, and then that's like service need security. So 2018 security enhanced for the service, and then modern authentication and authorization been added in 2019 to 2023, and then next generation authentication methods were added in 2024 and onwards, right? All right, so let's looking into what is Amazon Cognito. So Amazon Cognito is fully managed user identity and access management service that enable developers to add authentication, authorization, and user management to web and mobile applications. So basically, this is mainly used for developers when they're developing applications in a web and in a mobile application. How do you use this app? How do you authenticate these apps? And what is the method these apps to access their backend services in the AWS? How does these apps going to be used in S3 bucket? How do you get access into DynamoDB and get some details out of that? Because you need to, you can't get it like, sorry, without authentication and authorization to these services. There should be a way these mobile applications to access these services, right? So rather than mapping complex IAM infrastructure, Cognito allow you to focus on building great user experience. So implement secure authentication flows, control access to your resources, and manage user identity seamlessly. So safe path. How do you make a safe path to application in your mobile to access one of the AWS service and get back required details to you, right? That is how it works, right? My slides are a little bit mixed today. I'm going to go back and forth with some of these ones, right? All right, let's go to next one. All right, so let's looking into what is Cognito's co-authentication method, right? So these are the methods. So it's standard sign in. So you can create a username and password for the authentication, and then social integration also possible. You can use your Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple login, and then security enhanced. So you can have a multi-factor authentication login in. You can get SMS or temporary one-time password for multi-factor authentication. Send into your authenticator or there, and then enterprise integration, federation, SAML, and OITC support. And then again, if you these both methods doesn't work, so you can have a custom authentication, lambda based customer scheme, right? All right. So there are two type of basically two types of main components in Cognito. That is user pools and then identity pools, right? So let me explain you Cognito user pools, right? So user pools, user directory and sign in, right? So user pools, the primary function of a user pool is provide a secure user directory for sign up and sign in process. Okay, so let's say you want to log in into one of the application, right? Use that application in your mobile. Okay, so let's say you installed a new application, right? The first thing you have to do is you just have to sign into that application. But if you're not a user, right, you can sign in. So user pools allow you to sign up. So sign up, they might get a basic information, and then you can create a username and password. So this process might check you few things like it will send a code back to your email or code back to your mobile, and then verify that user, and it will give you a username and password, and then you can sign into access. So you become a user of that user pool, right? And when you're going to use one more time, another week's time, think about you might have forgotten your passwords, and you should be able to do password recovery. So the user here, so you can sign up and then you can sign in. Once you sign up, and then if you forget the password, you can do user recovery. So once you become a user of this user pool, and then you can sign in. Once you sign in, you become an authenticated user, right? When you become an authenticated user, right, you will be given a pass, right? JWT token, right? It is something like a ticket, right? Ticket, let's say something like a carnival. Um, some of these examples might not be exactly matching because of it might have a different, but think about something, right? So you come into a carnival or something, and then you go to initially you buy a ticket. So that is your ticket for the carnival, right? JWT token, right? So now you have a ticket, right? So because of you have a ticket, you when you enter into the carnival, you got so many other activities in there. You might have merry-go-round, right? So some other activities, right? And then now this is everything is like access protected resources. And once you give this JWS token, JWT token, right? So you can go into these access protected resources. So that is how normally, right? That uh, user pools working, right? From here, so you're going to go handing over this one into identity pool, right? That user pools and identity pools work together. But let me only explain user pools here, and then once I explain identity pools, and then we'll see how user pools and identity pools work together. So that's looking into capabilities of these user pools. I'm going to talk about user pools. So once you capability, so user registration and profile management. Okay, so once you sign up, so you become a user of user pool. So you have a profile and you have a password, and then your details are here, right? And then you can get a password recovery and reset. So you can do password recovery and reset if you forgot the password, right? And then once you registered, so you can do sign in and sign out operation. So you can log in into the application, and then you can log out from the application. And then the JWT token issuance, right, for the authenticated users. Once you log in, then you will be authenticated and you will be given a ticket, the token, JWT token, Java Web Token, uh, to authenticated users, right? So that is how user pools working, right? Let's see whether we can find about identity pools, right? The slides are mixed up. All right, so let's looking into Cognito identity pool. So identity pools is AWS service access. Once you get a token, right? How do you going to get access into services? So this can be doing in two different ways, right? I just need to tell you, right? This service can give access to guest as well as unauthenticated user, right? The previous service, user pools, there's no guest access supported. So you need to register there, like you need to sign up and you need to create an account. But this service support authenticated users and non-authenticated users. First, let's see how it support with the authenticated users. So once you authenticated, right? See that once you authenticated, here got identity providers, right? Identity providers. So who is identity provider? So the first thing, your identity pool, use identity pool is identity provider, right? And then your Facebook login, social media logins can be an identity provider. So your federated uh, third party identity provider can be an identity provider, right? So let's think about, right? So you are authenticated. So in this case, right, once you authenticated, so you got a JWT token, and then you pass this JWT token into identity pool, and then what happened? So that actually, when you're giving a JWT uh, uh, token, right? You become a user, you sign in, your profile will be matched into one of the group or user in a IAM role, right? So you have some sort of permissions in there, right? And then when you pass that identity token into identity pool, right? It maps that role into another roles in the identity pool. So identity pool has RBAC roles, right? Uh, that means role-based access control, right? Or they possibly have another one is called ABAC, attribute-based access control. So rollback access control means some roles are defined inside this identity pool. Attribute-based access control, they have some roles defined in attribute based. So your JWT token, now whatever permission you got from that JWT token will be mapped into a certain role inside the identity pool. So that role, once you get the temporary credentials, that role gives you access to AWS services like S3, API Gateway, or DynamoDB, right? So, so that's how it works. So let's clarify that process. So you sign in to identity pool, use identity pool, and then use identity pool has certain role into mapping into uh, um, your profile, and then this JWT token is handing over to identity pool, and that JWT token permissions whatever information based on identity pool will give you temporary credential access, which is actually mapped into a role in identity pool. That role is a role role based access control, or can be a attribute based access control, which enable you to use S3. So indirectly you're going to use user indirectly going to use the service, and then it will bring the details and back into your application. So that is the way if JWT comes from uh, user identity pool. But because of this one, still support guest or unauthenticated access, right? So let's think about something like that, right? So there's one website or something as a providing, right? Let's see, it's an educational website which providing paid courses, right? Paid courses. But think about uh, even if it's a paid course, right? So it will allow you to give a user to get some experience, hand-on experience, right? Before you getting a paid service, right? Let's say one of the academy, let's say ABC Academy. ABC Academy got a website, right? It provided like information technology courses. Let's say one of the course, right? One of the user interested, right? But they don't know yet what is the content. What they does, they give you access to certain course material. Let's see, they got 10 lessons, right? But they might give you one or two lessons free, one or two lessons. That's where the guest and unauthenticated users, like the other example I can tell you is think about a shopping cart, right? Sometimes, right? You don't need to log into a shopping cart like a shopping e-commerce website, right? So you logging in and you adding them, right? You adding your cart is, let's say your cart got 5 items, right? Then if you go with the cart, proceed forward, then that point they ask you to log in now. Okay, now if you want to proceed with buying, purchasing, then you're logging in. That's how they work. So this if you think about the primary functions enable user to obtain temporary AWS credentials for direct access to AWS service, right? So support authenticated users. The first one, so support authenticated users. So how does it support authenticated users? As I said, that JWT token coming from authenticated uh, user identity pool, right? And enable guest and unauthenticated access. That is how I explained about that e-commerce website. You still can add items into cart, but you can't purchase. When you're trying to purchase, go ahead. Then it will tell you, all right, now you logging in, right? or even if you can use a one time like a guest without permanently login, you can check out as a guest. So you provide your information, address, and then you provide credit card, and then it will give you guest access, right? Enable guest or unauthenticated access. So integrate with multiple identity providers. So uh, not like the user pool login in this one, it's a identity providers like you don't need to register with your email. So if you already got your Google or Facebook, so you can use that one, right? To start from this point. Don't go back to identity full, right? And then temporary credentials with automatic refresh. So temporary credentials provided like you given up temporary credentials. So you going into carnival. So once you are in that night, when you exit from a carnival premises, that's expiration your per time, so you can't go access back into that carnival anymore. So once you inside, you can access services. Once you go out, you finish with the um, like carnival, right? So that's how. Let's looking into. I'm just going to go to different things, right? All right. So we're going to compare user pools and identity pools comparison now, right? So primary purpose user pools is to create a user authentication and directory. So what does you keep in a user pool? So user credentials, profiles, and passwords. So it's a pool of users, right? Then identity pools, what it does is gives you temporary access, AWS service access and authorization. So what actions, what resources you have access, right? It has temporary AWS credentials. So what token types user pools got? So JWT token, that's the tickets, right? And then identity pools, AWS signature version for credential. So here in user pools, guest access is not supported. The, the identity pools guest access is fully supported because part of a website can be unauthenticated, right? Or you can even do like check out as a guest. You have seen that one in some of these e-commerce website, right? That's the advantage, right? You don't need to go for longer process, right? You don't do like you buying something not very frequently, right? Maybe once in a lifetime, once a year. So you don't need to create a user login in there. And then authentication methods. What you have here, user pools got so many different authentication methods. Open authentication to SAML or ITC and social identity providers, right? And then identity pools, external identity providers only. So they always going to be external identity. There no internal identity there, right? And then user pools, you can have multi-factor authentication like temporary one-time password, SMS, email. Identity pools, there's nothing multi-factor authentication because your token is the one going to be used in there, right? So access control. So once you're logging into user profile, your profile will be linked to a groups or IAM role mapping, right? And then that token, when you go to identity pools have another roles, RBAC and ABAC. RBAC means role-based access control, and then ABAC means attribute-based access control via AMA roles. So typical user cases, so web mobile app user login and management, right? So typically user pools being used into logging into particular application, and then identity pool. What identity pool does? Identity pool is used for accessing data in different services in AWS, right? So the best practice in here is most production applications use both together, user pools to authenticate users and issue AWT tokens, while identity pools exchange those tokens for temporary AWS credentials, right? That's how normally it works, right? Let's have a look what you got. All right, so we went through these slides. That one is done. That one is done. Okay, so again, just a quick comparing, one more comparing. I think this is how user pools versus identity pools is critical for building things. So what you need to understand, this one is guest access is not supported. You definitely need to log in, but identity pool guest access is fully supported, right? And then workflow is user authenticate with user pool. User pool return a JWT token. An application exchange JWT with identity pool, right? The identity pool returns a temporary AWS credentials and user access AWS services directly to S3, right? So this is something like user authenticated with the user pools, right? Something like let's say let's think about they're not exactly matching, but think about something like that, right? So think about you going into airport, right? Airport with your passport. So your passport is your credential to logging into entering into the airport, right? And once you entering into airport and so you enter into airport with your passport and then your ticket, they issue you once you show your tickets, they give you a boarding pass. So this boarding pass is uh, the one JWT token, the boarding pass you hand over to the boarding gate, right? And then you will be given access to certain role, right? Certain role. You are a passenger. So you logging into airport and you getting boarding pass, you are role of a passenger, right? And then according to that passenger role, it mapped into your role, and then you give it to a boarding gate, and then you will be entered into the flight, right? The flight you can be a economic class passenger, or you might be a first class passenger, right? That's one of the role will be match. But when you see into when you're looking into the airplane, so there may be crew members, right? They are not coming through your login, right? Like your user pool login. They might be coming in a different way. So that's the guest and unauthenticated user supported because they have authenticated in a different way. They got access. It's something like that's where you getting your identity pool returns temporary credentials. You are a economic, let's say, economic class passenger until your journey is finished. Once you go to destination, you uh, come out of a destination airport. So your time is expired now, right? Until then, you access into the facilities inside the flight. Now it's finished, right? So that is how these typical user pools and identity pools work together, right? So you could see in user pools, right? These are the things, the identity pools, these are the things, right? So let's go into let's go into a complete authentication flow, right? User pools and identity pools create a seamless authentication and authorization flow, enabling authenticated users to securely access database services, right? That's how let's think about. So user is here, and then user pool authentication, and then you got JWT token, and then you give it that one into a identity pool. Then identity pool maps your role and then gives you a temporary credentials, and then you can access these services, right? So that is how that is what I explained in this one. So user sign in with the username, password, or social provider, or SAML, right? So what is the purpose of logging in to return a JWT token? Once JWT token get right, it gives you a identity pool. So application present the JWT token to identity pool. Identity pool validates the token and maps user to appropriate IAM role on based on user group attribute or custom mapping, right? And once you mapping, identity pool generate AWS credential temporary, right? Access key can be a secret key, a session token with automatic expiration. Your flight duration might be 3 hours, 4 hours. The credential inherit permission from the mapped IMA role. So it maps whatever the role coming from user login to map into your credentials. And then user can now make a direct API call to AWS services, right? Using temporary credentials. All actions are logged auditable through CloudTrail. So what are the, as we discuss, what are the key benefits of this architecture? It's a security wise, no long-term credentials, temporary tokens, reduce risk of credential compromise, scalability, then fine-grained roles control, and then auditability, so you can be audited, cost efficient, and then flexible integration with the external providers, right? That's good. All right, that's the same thing. Identity pool, we discussed that. Uh, Additional benefits and reliability. All right, let's discuss AWS ecosystem integration with this also Cognito. So Cognito seamlessly integrate with the key AWS services to provide comprehensive authentication and authorization solution, right? So integration it integrate with the API gateway, Lambda, and S3. See that is authenticate, right? Issue credentials to identity pools, or you can do with Amazon Lambda. So it's Amazon Lambda gives you access to DynamoDB here, or through Lambda, right? S3. So that is how authorization logic, authentication and authorization logic work. And finally, we're going to looking into, I already discussed, I think, but we're going to looking into practical scenarios cognito across AWS workloads. So the first one is the e-commerce platform, right? Multi-tenant SaaS application with customer sign-ups, social login, and role-based access. Cognito user pools manage 100,000 plus user with the multi-factor authentication enabled, right? And then it will give you temporary credential to customer upload. So e-commerce website, you can use these scenarios, right? And then mobile and web application, right? iOS, Android, web, right? Cognito handles a federated identity with Google, Apple, enabling one-click sign-in while maintaining consistent user profiles, right? And then you can use them in enterprise applications, enterprise grade authentication like OAuth 2.0 and SAML, right? So providing single sign-on across multiple applications and managing fine-grained IAM permission. And then game in leaderboard, right? Real-time multiplayer gaming required guest access and social login. Cognito identity pools issue temporary AWS credentials, allowing players to access DynamoDB leaderboards, S3 for game access without mapping long-term keys. So easy, right? And then you can get data analytics, right? Key advantage across this scenario, rapid deployment without building custom authentication systems. So you can use this one. Scalability to handle millions of concurrent users, compliance with industry standard, HIPAA, PCI DSS, general data protection laws, right? Cost optimization through managed service model, seamless AWS service integration, security best practice. So that is all about Amazon Cognito. Um, I think this is for today.